everybody. Thanks for joining me here for Quick Tip Thursday. This is Nichole with Topaz, and today's Quick Tip Thursday session is on transforming your kind of bland landscape images into brilliant landscapes with Topaz Adjust. Adjust gives you the ability to easily change your exposure, contrast, detail, and color very quickly. And it has very intuitive adjustments with unique algorithms on the back end that really give you a unique look and can unlock some potential that you might not see otherwise within your landscape imagery. So today we're going to be taking a look at this image from Yellowstone. I'll just go Filter, Topaz Labs, Topaz Adjust. We'll get right in, and ooh, that's pretty strong. I'm going to come down to this lower right and press Reset. Now, over on the right-hand side, you can easily independently go in and change your adaptive exposure, which is going to control your contrast and exposure, your details and color very quickly. Just add those exactly the way you want it. Or you can combine that process and come over to the left-hand side and use a preset first to really transform those landscape images immediately. One of my favorite presets is located within the Classic Collection, and it's called Photo Pop. Photo Pop is a simple pop preset that just gives you a little bit of the adaptive exposure, some really beautiful detail, and some nice color enhancements all together very quickly to start to make those landscapes pop out. If they seem a little bland, this one will just start the process of making things jump out. Here's before and here's after. It's one of my favorite presets for landscapes to start out on if I'm going for something a little bit more subtle. If I want to have a little bit more of an effect on my image, I like to go into my preset collection grid views. So when you have a collection selected, if you come down here and take a look at the grid view, it's the little icon that looks like a tic-tac-toe box. You will pull up the grid view that shows you all of the presets within that collection at the same time. And then you can scroll through and decide, you know what, which one actually looks the best for this particular image. Maybe it's this Warm Tone 2 preset, which I really like. Let me click on that, and that's going to be applied to my image. Now, within the Classic Collection is where you'll find the more subtle presets. So if you don't want to have a really affected type of look, this is where you want to stick around. If you want to have a little bit more of a vibrant and poppy type of landscape that really starts to pull some of that localized contrast, open up those shadow areas, get some detail into the highlights, and really kind of give you a balanced yet very strong image, you can go in and add something like the autumn presets, or go in and here's Boost. Now this starts to go a little over the top with the color, but it does some really nice things in certain areas of the image. A very popular effect of ours is called Spicify, or Spicify, however you'd like to say it. Spicify gives you a ton of detail and grit and craziness, but if you look at what's happening in the trees, you can see all of that color and detail really starts to pop out of those shadows. So then you can start off with a preset like this and then come over and individually adjust certain things such as your detail strength. Start to take off some of those over-the-top adjustments, open up areas where you want, and all of a sudden you have a landscape image that went from kind of flat, a little bit boring, to something that is really brilliant and poppy. Now, let's go ahead and press Reset All and come over to the right-hand side and let me show you how I like to independently work with my landscape images and which tools I go to right away. It's pretty standard tools that I use in any workflow, but for landscapes, there's a little bit of a difference than my usual workflow. So for landscapes, I would come into my global adjustment area first, open that up, go into my adaptive exposure, and take my adaptive exposure up, keeping my attention on areas or on the overall image and just kind of looking at the highlights and the blacks and kind of the dramatic aspect of the exposure adjustment. Then the region slider is going to take all of that kind of more dramatic exposure and contrast that I just added. And as I take that region slider to the right and break my image down into smaller and smaller regions, it's going to put highlights, shadows, and midtones into all of those very small regions. So essentially what it's doing is giving you a highlight even in your shadow area. So it's going to pull some detail out of those shadows and open those up. And so I like to use my region slider just to balance out that exposure setting that I added with the adaptive exposure. And so it's not as dramatically applied to the overall image, but more balanced as I take it to the right. More localized contrast and exposure. Here's before, here's after. Usually in my landscape images, I really like the extra detail that's added in by default within Topaz Adjust. You can see down here, especially in this image with the rocks and the soil, that all of that grit and texture detail is really standing out now. And usually I like that. However, with this particular image, it feels a little too dirty, like the default setting is just a bit too strong. So my next area that I go to is down here within my detail work. And if I find the detail a bit too strong, I go down to my process details independently and check that. And what it's going to do, I keep doing this, let me turn my details on first. What it's going to do is just automatically smooth out your image and take the automatic default detail enhancements that were added within in the adaptive exposure, and it separates it. It takes it away. So now I can independently increase the detail to the detail that I want. Now I'm just going to go into my strength, which is going to work on the overall detail in my image, the larger image elements, and just take that up. And now the detail boost, which works on that really grittiness, if you take it way up, you can see it really starts to go super gritty. With that detail boost, I'm just going to add in a smaller amount than was default or automatically added in by default. So I'm liking that a little bit more, maybe a tiny bit more detail boost. Here we go. Here's before my detail adjustments. Well, that's with the adaptive exposure adding it on. Here's after. Here's after my process details independently, which was just way too strong for me. Much more natural detail enhancement now. The next area I like to go in is the color. In the color, you have your adaptive saturation and color regions. As you take your adaptive saturation up, as your color regions are at 1, it's going to just apply saturation in a fairly traditional manner. It's not going to be as strong, so you can take your saturation up really high. However, as you break your image down into color regions, it's going to try to balance out your color adjustments to kind of match each other. So you'll see as you take that color regions up, you'll see that certain things that aren't as saturated will increase saturation, such as the blue here within the geyser, and then things that are saturated and highly saturated, such as the orange around it, start to desaturate. So it kind of balances out saturation, desaturating certain areas that might be a bit too strong and saturating areas that might not have enough. And it does this all intelligently on the back end, and I love using this for landscape specifically. I also usually use my saturation and saturation boost, and it's the same idea, except it doesn't do it it doesn't desaturate. You have to go in and manually work with your saturation. So you can desaturate by taking your saturation levels down, but with the adaptive saturation, it's going to balance out desaturating and saturating all on its own, whereas the saturation and saturation boost do similar things, but you do it manually. So your saturation boost or your regular saturation will take up your overall saturation, and then your saturation boost will work on the colors that aren't as saturated as your highly saturated colors and really pull those out and try to balance out your overall saturation with that saturation boost. So you can work on your saturation in several different ways. Again, with my landscape imagery, I really find that this adaptive saturation works quite nicely. Here's before. Here's after. And now I have gone in and worked with my exposure, some very dramatic contrast, details, and a very interesting way of working with color, all very quickly, kind of revealing a lot of color detail and impact that wasn't there in the initial image. Here's before and here's after. So that's how I would quickly work with adding or transforming my landscapes from bland to brilliant, or just giving it a little extra oomph very quickly within Topaz Adjust. I really do enjoy starting off with the presets on the left-hand side and then working with the additional sliders and parameters over on the right-hand side to make it my own. But I wanted to show you manually how you could work over here as well. One thing that I also want to quickly jump down into my finishing touches and show you is the warmth slider. I find that these are really important. This one slider can be really essential for certain temperature adjustments. If you want a warmer image, just come into the warmth slider, take that to the right, and just go very soft, and you can get some beautiful warm light added in to that image. Or if you want to go cooler and add a little bit more of a blue color, you can go to the left and really get a nice wintry type of cooling effect within your image. So you have some ways to kind of adjust the atmospheric light here with the warmth slider. The last thing I want to show you really quickly, I know we're running out of time here, is the local adjustment brush out brush. Many times in our landscape images, we have areas like sky that don't really respond well to a lot of the color and detail adjustments that you might be applying in other areas. It just gets a little too grainy and a little too affected. Some of these adjustments work much better on detailed parts of your image where it can kind of really extract a lot of image information. But if there's not a lot of image information to work with, it's just going to start extracting pixels and start to look like noise. So I like to brush it out of smooth areas. I don't mind the adjustments within this particular image. I find them non-distracting. But if you find that in your landscape images, just things like skies start to get overworked, go into your local adjustments area and go to our brush out brush. Usually with skies, it's quite easy to use our edge aware technology. So take that edge aware technology all the way to 100% by taking your edge aware slider to 1, and that's going to make your brush very color aware. And now you can go in and just change your brush size, your opacity. If you want to take everything out, take your opacity to 1, your hardness, which is the feathering of the brush. Now just go over the horizon line with your brush, making sure to keep the crosshairs of the brush, which is located right in the middle, on the blue of the sky versus the green of the trees or the mountains or anything like that. It doesn't matter if the rest of your brush goes into those trees, as long as the crosshairs stay on the blue, you're going to be able to create a very exact mask that allows for the application of your adjustments on the areas that you want, such as the trees and the hills in the background, but not the sky. So it's as easy as that. And you can see down here in the lower right just how exact it was able to get in between all those little trees. Here's before and after. Again, before and after. It's no longer applying to my sky, only to my foreground. Thank you so much for attending here today. I hope this gave you some good tips for your landscape images and how to create brilliant landscapes with Topaz Adjust. Have a great weekend, everybody, and we'll be talking to you next Tuesday. Bye-bye.